The air inside the supermarket was frigid, a stark contrast to the sweltering summer evening outside. The sterile, fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly as I pushed my shopping cart down the narrow aisles, the wheels squeaking in protest. My intention was to grab a few last-minute items before heading home, but little did I know that my routine trip to the store would soon turn into a spine-chilling ordeal. It was late, and the supermarket was nearly empty, with just a few other late-night shoppers scattered throughout the cavernous store. The hush of the almost deserted aisles made every sound feel magnified, and the oppressive silence was occasionally broken by the clattering of shopping carts or the faint hum of refrigeration units. As I reached the end of an aisle, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if someone had breathed my name, their voice barely audible above the background noise. I turned, scanning the empty aisle for any sign of another shopper, but there was no one in sight. "Hello?" I called out, my voice quivering. "Is anyone there?" No response. The silence settled back in, heavy and suffocating. I dismissed the whisper as a product of my overactive imagination and continued down the aisle, my heart still racing. As I made my way through the store, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was as if unseen eyes were following my every move, hidden in the shadows. I quickened my pace, determined to finish my shopping and escape the oppressive atmosphere. But as I turned a corner into the canned goods aisle, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. There, in the middle of the aisle, stood a mannequin, a life-sized, eerily lifelike mannequin dressed in a tattered, blood-stained wedding gown. Its glassy eyes seemed to lock onto mine, and its frozen smile sent a chill down my spine. I recoiled, my heart pounding, and took a step back. The mannequin's presence was inexplicable. It didn't belong in a supermarket aisle, and the sight of it sent waves of dread coursing through me. As I tried to gather my thoughts and summon the courage to move, the mannequin's head tilted ever so slightly to the side, its plastic gaze never leaving mine. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be moving, but it was. I stumbled back further, my cart crashing into a display of canned vegetables, sending them clattering to the floor. The sound echoed through the empty store, but no one else seemed to be around to hear it. In that moment, I knew I had to get out of there. My heart was racing and a primal fear gripped me. I abandoned my shopping cart and turned to flee, but as I did, I heard a low, guttural moan. It was coming from behind me, from the direction of the mannequin. I dared to steal a glance over my shoulder, and what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my days. The mannequin was no longer just an inanimate figure. It had come to life, its limbs contorted and twisted as it slowly lurched forward, one plastic footstep at a time, the tattered wedding gown rustling with each movement. Panic surged through me as I sprinted down the aisle, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the mannequin's haunting moans growing closer, and I knew I had to escape before it reached me. The store's exit loomed ahead, and I raced toward it, the mannequin's eerie pursuit echoing behind me. With one final burst of adrenaline, I burst through the double glass doors and into the warm, welcoming glow of the streetlights outside. I glanced back, expecting to see the mannequin at the threshold, but it had stopped just inside the store, frozen once more. Breathing heavily and trembling with fear, I stumbled to my car and drove away, leaving my abandoned cart and the sinister supermarket behind. I couldn't explain what had happened, and I didn't want to. All I knew was that I had narrowly escaped something beyond my comprehension, something that defied the laws of reality. To this day, I avoid that supermarket, haunted by the memory of the mannequin that came to life in the dead of night. A chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying horrors can lurk in the most mundane of places. The flickering fluorescent lights cast eerie shadows on the shelves of the supermarket as I pushed my cart down the narrow aisle. It was late, and the store was nearly empty, with only a few stragglers like myself trying to grab some last-minute groceries before closing time. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigeration units. Little did I know that this mundane trip to the supermarket would become a nightmarish ordeal. I had just turned the corner into the frozen food section when I heard it, a soft, mournful cry coming from somewhere deeper within the store. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen. It sounded like a child's voice, a desperate whimper for help. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling with uncertainty. "Is anyone there?" No response, just the distant hum of the freezers. I debated whether to investigate further, or to simply leave and call the store manager, but my conscience got the best of me. What if a child was lost or in trouble? I couldn't just walk away. I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing in the empty aisles. The cry grew louder as I approached the back of the store. It led me to a dimly lit, cluttered storeroom that was usually off-limits to customers. The door was slightly ajar and the crying seemed to be coming from inside. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open cautiously, the rusty hinges creaking in protest. The storeroom was a labyrinth of cardboard boxes and shelves, barely illuminated by a single flickering light bulb. And there, in the far corner, I saw her. A little girl, no older than 5, huddled on the cold concrete floor. "Hey there," I said softly, trying to sound comforting as I approached her. "Are you okay? What are you doing here all alone?" She looked up at me with teary eyes, her face smeared with dirt and grime. Her clothes were tattered, and she clutched a worn teddy bear to her chest. "I'm lost," she sobbed. My heart went out to her. I knelt down and offered my hand. "It's going to be okay. Let's get you out of here and find your parents, okay?" She hesitated for a moment, but then placed her small hand in mine. As I helped her to her feet, I noticed something odd, a chill in the air that seemed to seep from the shadows around us. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I dismissed it as a product of my imagination. We made our way back to the brightly lit aisles of the supermarket, and the little girl began to relax, her sobs subsiding. I scanned the store for any signs of her parents, but found no one in sight. The manager was nowhere to be seen either. I approached the checkout counter and explained the situation to the teenage cashier, who looked at me with a mix of confusion and concern. She picked up the store's intercom and announced that a lost child had been found and requested the parents to come to the front. Minutes turned into hours, and still, no one came forward. The manager, who had finally appeared, furrowed his brow as he checked the security footage. "I don't understand," he muttered. "There's no record of anyone entering the store with a child." Panic began to creep in, replacing the initial sense of goodwill. The little girl was now sitting in a shopping cart, clutching her teddy bear tightly. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her eyes darting nervously around the store. As the hours dragged on, a sense of unease settled upon the supermarket. The once familiar surroundings now felt sinister, and the silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the floor or the distant hum of the refrigeration units. I decided to call the police, fearing that something was terribly wrong. They arrived swiftly, their flashing lights and sirens briefly piercing the darkness outside. An officer approached us, and I explained the situation, including the strange circumstances surrounding the girl's appearance. The officer took a photo of the girl and her teddy bear, promising to broadcast it to the local news in hopes of finding her parents. Meanwhile, he questioned me about what had happened in the storeroom, seeming both concerned and perplexed. Hours turned into a long night and still no one came to claim the child. The police contacted Child Protective Services and the little girl was taken into their custody, her cries of distress echoing in my ears as she was led away. I left the supermarket that night, haunted by the inexplicable events that had transpired. I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent lurked in the shadows of that store, something far more terrifying than a lost child. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder if I had stumbled upon a nightmarish world that existed just beyond the fluorescent lights and the neatly stacked shelves, a world that I had been fortunate enough to escape, but one that would forever haunt my dreams. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the small town, I found myself in the midst of a harrowing experience that defied all reason. It had started as an ordinary evening, a quick stop at the local supermarket to pick up some essentials before heading home. Little did I know that my mundane shopping trip would soon turn into a chilling nightmare. The supermarket was eerily quiet, with only a few other customers scattered throughout the aisles. The soft hum of refrigerators and the distant clatter of shopping carts were the only sounds that filled the air. The flickering overhead lights added to the unsettling atmosphere, casting eerie patterns on the floor. I made my way through the aisles, collecting the items on my list, when I noticed a peculiar sensation, a feeling of being watched. I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me in the dimly lit store. But the unease persisted, like a shadow that refused to be ignored. I turned into the canned goods aisle, my heart pounding in my chest. And there, at the end of the aisle, I saw her. A little girl, no older than 7, with long, disheveled hair that obscured her face. She was standing perfectly still, her bare feet on the cold linoleum floor, staring directly at me. I froze in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. "Hey there," I called out tentatively, my voice trembling. "Are you okay?" No response. The girl continued to stare, her eyes wide and unblinking. She seemed lost and frightened. I took a hesitant step forward, my unease growing with each passing second. "Do you need help? Are you lost?" The girl slowly nodded, her hair parting slightly to reveal her pale, hollow eyes. She took a step toward me, her bare feet making no sound on the floor. My instincts told me to run, to get away from this eerie child, but my heart went out to her. I couldn't abandon a frightened child in a deserted supermarket. I approached cautiously and reached out to take her hand. As my fingers brushed against hers, a bone-chilling coldness washed over me, causing me to recoil. It was as if I had touched something from another world, something unnatural. "We need to find your parents," I said, trying to mask my fear. "Can you tell me your name?" She remained silent, but her gaze never wavered. I decided to take her to the store's front desk, hoping that someone there could help us locate her family. As we walked, the supermarket seemed to change around us. The once familiar surroundings now felt sinister, and the silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the floor or the distant hum of the refrigeration units. I decided to call the police, fearing that something was terribly wrong. They arrived swiftly, their flashing lights and sirens briefly piercing the darkness outside. An officer approached us, and I explained the situation, including the strange circumstances surrounding the girl's appearance. The officer took a photo of the girl and her teddy bear, promising to broadcast it to the local news in hopes of finding her parents. Meanwhile, he questioned me about what had happened in the storeroom, seeming both concerned and perplexed. Hours turned into a long night, and still, no one came to claim the child. The police contacted Child Protective Services, and the little girl was taken into their custody, her cries of distress echoing in my ears as she was led away. I left the supermarket that night, haunted by the inexplicable events that had transpired. I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent lurked in the shadows of that store, something far more terrifying than a lost child. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder if I had stumbled upon a nightmarish world that existed just beyond the fluorescent lights and the neatly stacked shelves, a world that I had been fortunate enough to escape, but one that would forever haunt my dreams.